This is the IBJ Podcast for the week of July 27, 2026, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Election Day is scheduled for November the 3rd, so we're just a bit more than 3 months away. This is the midterms, so there's a lot at stake at the federal and state levels, in addition to many referendums for local school districts. On July 16th, President Trump delivered a 26-minute primetime address about election security, warning us that our elections are vulnerable to fraud and need immediate attention. Among his claims, Trump said China was able to acquire 220 million U.S. voter files in the year 2020 and wants to exploit that data. He also said a Department of Homeland Security investigation found that 278,000 noncitizens are registered to vote in federal elections. Regular listeners of the IBJ Podcast know that we already had scheduled a return visit with Chetrice Romero, Senior Cybersecurity Advisor for law firm Ice Miller, to talk specifically about election security, so the president's address gave us even more grist for the mill. Romero has worked extensively with the state and federal government on election security and is currently consulting with state and county officials on November's election. In this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast, she starts off by putting Trump's comments in context, engaging the threat level of his claims. She then goes in great detail explaining the many steps that local and state officials are taking in Indiana to secure the election. And she weighs in on my pet policy proposal of going back to an all-paper voting system. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Chetrice Romero, Senior Cybersecurity Advisor for law firm Ice Miller. Thank you for making time to come back to the studio.
Yes, it was fun the first time, so why not go in for a second time?
Well, we still have a lot to talk about.
I know, yes, always a lot to talk about.
So last time we were here, we talked a lot about cybersecurity and cybersecurity's very close sibling, election security.
Oh, 100%.
Is our topic today. Do me a favor. We did this off microphone a little while ago, but let's do it again. Just kind of give me a sense of how and when you have worked on election security issues and for who.
Yeah, absolutely. So election security is dear to my heart from the very beginning when election security was deemed to be critical infrastructure in the United States back in 2016. So I think started discussing it in 2015, but it really became 2016 was like where everything needed to be set up. So I've worked with all the Secretary of States in the state of Indiana in my previous role with the state as the cybersecurity program director and kind of connecting those kind of important considerations in cybersecurity. But when it comes to election security, it's bigger than just cyber, right? It's bigger than just tech. You're looking at operational security, you're looking at physical security and cybersecurity. So those are the things we focused in on. So I've worked with the previous three Secretary of States in the planning at a state level, and then also have worked closely with clerks throughout the state of Indiana in that. And then in my previous role with Homeland Security at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA, I was actually, as a cyber advisor for them, I was also the lead election security person for the federal government, liaisoning with the state of Indiana, and then assisted in national efforts as well with our election security advisors. So when it comes to election security, I know a lot about it. Do I know everything about it? Absolutely not. There's no way to do that. But I definitely know enough to assist not just in the cybersecurity realm, but also the physical security, operational security that is elections.
And you're currently doing some work.
I am, yes. Yeah. As part of my gig at Ice Miller, I got to continue basically the kind of things I did when I was at federal and state. So, currently I'm working with the Secretary of State's office in providing resources, since many of those are no longer available to local governments and states at the moment, at least, and also working with counties specifically with any of their election security concerns and preparing for the upcoming elections, looking at their incident response plans, looking at their operational downtime procedures, training, education. How are they talking about it with their leadership? How are they talking about it with their local law enforcement? Who do they contact if bad things happen at the state and federal level? So those are all things with that I'm also continuing to assist with, which I love because it was kind of part of the gig on coming to IceMiller was I still get to do everything I love to do before, especially with critical infrastructures like election security.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm talking to the right person.
You are. You're talking. I hope
good.
so. And if there's anybody who disagrees, then, they should write me.
So so we had a pretty good idea what we were going to talk about. And then since we last spoke, President Trump delivered a 26-minute primetime address on July 16th about election security. I would say that the gist of the address was to warn Americans that elections are vulnerable to fraud and need immediate attention. Specifically, he said he was releasing declassified intelligence reports revealing shocking vulnerabilities in our election infrastructure, saying it is vulnerable to hacking, exploitation, and foreign interference. Did you happen to catch that address?
I did. I was on vacation and I still did. So, because part of vacation is doing election security.
Hey, we're all citizens here.
We're all citizens. I'm still a voter. So absolutely. Yeah. Registered, proven citizen, everything. Yeah.
So were you listening for information just regarding technology, or do you really have a professional interest? Election security.
Yeah, absolutely. As a whole, I mean, I think anytime any president, and the last 3 presidents have addressed election security. This was unique in the sense it was a prime time address, but I still think it's important. And I really was curious as a professional and also as a voter to see what is this administration and how are they viewing election security. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So.
All right. Do you mind if I go through the 5 main points that the president brought up? And for the most part, if not entirely, these relate to documents that he said he was declassifying or were being declassified.
Okay.
And we'll just hit it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So the 5 main areas of concern. He said starting during the 2020 election cycle, the People's Republic of China carried out what is believed to be the largest compromise of election data in history, resulting in China's illicit acquisition of 220 million U.S. voter files. Was that known? Is that...
I think what has been known for quite a while. I mean, federal government has been communicating that China, Russia, Iran has all been very interested in not only getting the information that you just talked about, as far as knowing who the voters are. I mean, and it's not even really new to election security files. It's all files. Like they're interested in everything that we do, right? But most certainly with a focus of election. And it's also federal government has been very upfront about foreign malign influence when it comes to these nation states who are wanting to absolutely take away public confidence, get information on election. And I think when you talk about the vulnerability of election systems, you got to take like one step back as far as looking at the picture. When you're looking at, and most certainly let me very much caveat that I can speak to Indiana. There's other states he talked about. I cannot speak, nor am I confirming nor denying. That's not was never within my purview, right? So I want to be appropriate when it comes to speaking to my experience with elections. But for the state of Indiana, you most certainly saw attempts at getting information regarding the records and so on. But I think it is equally important to know that when you're looking at the bigger system, it's because election security, like the clerk's office, right? That is the prime election official that is overseeing elections at your local level, right? They are part of a local government system, and local governments are 100% vulnerable, right? So if you're looking at the larger picture, they are sharing the same systems of a population that is vulnerable. So is that statement that there is vulnerability within our election systems accurate? Absolutely. I think there is a lot of things in place when it comes to the information that is crossing the desk of a clerk's office that is part of a system that is very difficult to protect. But there are also a lot of really good people in local government who are trying their best to protect it, right? And even the best of the best can still get attacked by a nation state. And I say this to not on just local governments, but even corporations. If China wants to get into your system, they're going to find a way, whether it's through social engineering, whether it's through zero-day vulnerabilities like we talked about last time, right? Those vulnerabilities that not even the big corporations know, like Microsoft's that are there. They're going to find a way because they are put a lot of resources into it, right? So as far as his statement as to it's vulnerable, yeah, it's absolutely vulnerable. I mean, I think that's all the more reason why we should be offering resources at federal, state to locals who don't have the budgets and don't have the resources to address all the concerns.
I'm going to tiptoe into this because I'm just a guy who wrote a book about not necessarily election interference, but about how the political parties create dossiers on American voters. And my impression is that our political parties have pretty ready access to information about voters. I mean, does China have anything different from what the Republican Party might have on me?
I mean, I don't think so. Much of who you are as a voter is so public, right? Where you live, those are public records on who owns your mortgages in the counties, right? And so, I think it's really about the intent of the nefarious intent with that information is what's different, right? So I think as far as the data points that China may have on somebody, it probably is similar to what maybe other people have. I would say, hackers are hackers. So maybe China, maybe anonymous, and maybe they get into your Experian or TransUnion. They have probably a lot more information on you than your election record, right? I mean, so I think it just really varies on the resources that the organization has to get that information. And then I think what should be concerning to any voter is what are they going to use it for, right?
All right. The president's second concern was that members of the deep state in, I guess, the U.S. intelligence agency, he said, worked to actively suppress and downplay information about the extent of China's sinister election meddling, covering it up from both the president and the American people. Does that harmonize? Does that reflect any of?
Not in my experience. I mean, when I worked for Federal Homeland Security, I mean, I was privy to a lot of classified discussions, and the discussions was never to, well, we know this and let's make sure to keep it away from people. I mean, Secretary of State had access to get clearance. Members of the state had access to have and had clearance to be privy to that information as well. So at least not in my experience, most certainly I don't have the full national or picture of other states, but for Indiana, we sat in those rooms with classified information and then we brainstormed how can we collectively, federal, state, work to further and best educate the local governments so they can be better protected. So, I think it is difficult as a voter to hear that and most certainly concerning. But as a person that sat on the inside, I never saw any intelligence agency withhold information for the sake of withholding. If they were withholding or not making things public, it was because they were trying to protect, as any classified information goes, the source of where that information was coming from, and, sometimes also making public, at least in cybersecurity, hey, this nation is using this vulnerability to access A, B, and C. Do we want to go make that public so that every nation and hacker also knows about that vulnerability? I mean, it's a very delicate balance. So what you do, at least what we would do, is then we would say, okay, we know this is a vulnerability, so why don't we go and do some education discussions with the IT, directors and MSPs, the clerks, the commissioners in this case, right? Of, hey, if you have this if you have this system that there's this new vulnerability, why don't you go check it out, right? So that is how we worked, at least here. And I would say that in those classified discussions, all other states were part of it in there too with their other state counterparts. So I find it hard to believe as a person who was on the inside, but again, I most certainly understand the concern for any voter who hears that, but it was never my experience that anybody was nefariously keeping anything, downplaying anything.
I know the president has said that he's concerned that China and other countries have been trying to meddle in our elections.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe we didn't necessarily know about that, or people just weren't told that. How does that strike you?
I would say the largest concern that I have from my perspective and the knowledge that I have is the meddling is a psychological warfare of meddling. So social media is the prime area where they are meddling, if you're really like wanting to know. Like and that's been public for a while, and if anything, there was I know when at CISA I was very frustrated because we couldn't really talk about misinformation, malinformation, because people were concerned that we were interfering in the First Amendment. No, if American goes and says something that's wrong, go for it. It's your First Amendment right to say your truth or whatever you want to call it, right? But did Russia, China also create profiles to add fuel to the misinformation and disinformation out there, or malinformation to get people going and to believe a certain thing so that they felt not as confident in our democracy and election? Absolutely. I mean, it's a low-hanging fruit. It's easy to create and have a whole basically center of people in China and Russia to just create fake profiles and add a whole bunch of terrible foreign malign influence propaganda to add to the fuel of what people will see online. So yeah, that is how they meddle. I don't think they're meddling. I most certainly don't think and believe that they're meddling in a more technical infrastructure component, what people believe to be the case, or from a government perspective. I don't believe that. I believe that they are taking advantage of that low-hanging fruit, that it's much easier to go and honestly psychologically manipulate the public into believing A, B, and C about our election infrastructure. And what I say to that and how I always communicate to not only my family and friends and professionally is that is why you don't believe everything you see, especially on social media. Even if your friend and your family member repost something and you trust that friend, don't always trust the fact that they double checked facts, right? So go to trusted resources, double check the facts. Don't add to the fuel if you aren't sure about what you're talking about. But if you do, then, and you're a citizen of America, then First Amendment right is what's there. I just think as we educate and we go and vote and do our part of our democracy, I think personally it's important to be as well informed as possible with the most accurate information, which I think as a journalist, you believe that too. So that's kind of where I always just say, lightly tread that, and just what I tell my kids, don't believe everything you see online. Go verify.
I think the ultimate fear is that one of these bad actors that we've been talking about has been able to go into a system, into the infrastructure, and been able to change a vote, been able to say, well, these 5,000 votes for Democrat Bob, we're going to change these to votes for Republican Sally.
No.
Has that ever happened?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, our systems are very hard to do that with. And, I can most certainly speak to Indiana and the systems in Indiana and the infrastructure in Indiana. It's very secure. I mean, there's a lot, again, of misinformation out there about how somebody can go and change that, right? And that's not the case, right? Like, I don't know if anybody has ever watched Scandal, where they have a whole voter go manipulation. That is so far from what happens and actually happens in the situation. It's Hollywood, right? And I think that is the same in this case, is that it is very difficult to go in and do that. There's so many walls in place and check balances in place at the state level, at local level. There's a lot of good people at the local level and state level who are doing everything they can to validate everybody who's voting. There's a lot of things at the polling site that you have to do in order to verify that you are who you are, right? And so I would say that it is not my belief that at all is occurring. I do believe the meddling that's happening is the social media element of it, the psychological warfare, the misinformation from foreign malign influences that affect and undercuts what we believe to be a solid election infrastructure.
Okay. And I think the final point he wanted to make, he said that he was releasing the results of a stunning investigation by the Department of Homeland Security. So the DHS identified approximately 278,000 non-citizens who are registered to vote in federal elections.
I mean, we've seen the public stories of Mickey Mouse is registered to vote, right? Somebody who died is still registered to vote, right? And is that happening? I think, nothing is perfect. Most certainly there are errors in our voting, on our poll records, right? And I think it says a lot that DHS still did that, and then they addressed it directly with those states on how are we doing this. But I also think, like, as a voter, think about all the steps you have to go and see Mickey Mouse coming in and not looking like a cartoon. Somebody's not going to let them go and move forward in the polling site to do it, right? So again, those checks and balances. So even when there are errors on the polling things, there are still so many verifications, validations that happen, not only on the local level, at the polling site, at the state level, the election boards that are both Democrat and Republican, right? They're bipartisan, so it's not like one party's. There's oversight, right? So that happens across the board. And when somebody is questioning results and doing recounts, the number of bipartisan people and lawyers that are involved in that, I think, says a lot, right? And so is there names that shouldn't be on polling records across the whole United States and millions of people? I'm sure there is. Is it significant enough to change election results? That would be hard for me to believe, but I would need to see the report and data. I think more importantly for the voters that are listening and businesses are there steps in place to counter that? 100%. And so, most certainly, again, speaking to the state of Indiana, and seeing the infrastructure here, there are a number of things that a lot of good people put in place to protect our democracy and voting here.
So let's say I'm a non-citizen who is registered to vote in Indiana, because we can talk about Indiana. So you're saying that there are enough checks in place that by the time I get to the polling place on election day and then try to cast a vote, I will be stopped somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I really believe that. I mean, I've heard case studies in those situations where this doesn't make sense. Let's verify that. And the amount of hours that clerks put into validating their polling, verifying addresses, cross-referencing it against other state records like BMVs and the Secretary of State and all these other things. Like, the system is so much more complex than what people talk about. And that complexity, that bureaucracy that people sometimes complain about, it's there for a reason. It's there to do these protections. And so I have every faith in our clerks, in our local governments, in the processes set forth for many years by several Secretary of States, as well as the work that Homeland Security did do when they took over elections in 2016 as a critical infrastructure to provide resources to, including a lot of money to further secure it. So, that was why it became a critical infrastructure, because from a federal government perspective, it was becoming increasingly obvious that nation states are going after this. We need to provide a lot of money to states. A lot of money was given to states to secure things. I mean, that's been happening for a number of years since 2016. So, this is not a concern that's new, but it most certainly, I'm most certainly interested to see what the administration is going to do in providing more resources to those local governments who do oversee such a critical part of our democracy and critical infrastructures, because I think they are vulnerable for a lot of reasons. I think they have a lot of things in place. Bad actors are increasing their technologies and are increasing, their ways of getting to things and getting to people and undermining our democracy. So with that, we should be providing more resources so that we can keep up with the bad actors, right? And I think that hopefully is the takeaway that people see in some of these concerns around.
So I'm hearing that there are vulnerabilities, along the expanse of the voting system, but also that we should have confidence in the election.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so those aren't two opposing things.
I think it's a complex thing, right? There are enough things in place right now manually to have the confidence in place for it, right? But the other side of the coin of using technology and the way the nation states are working is that we can't just say we're safe and we're done, right? Like, we have to keep up with the enhancing threats that are happening, which I do agree with, right? And when you look at the larger picture of the local governments, the county governments that have little budget to little resources to consistently stay up to date with cybersecurity threats, when you have such a passionate audience on both sides of the aisle who may create more physical threats, to polling sites and workers, right? We have seen an increase of physical threatening of clerks and physical threatening of polling sites. And so you have to just, I think, evolve as this is continuing to happen with time, right? And with, just the way that our society has shifted, but also especially with AI technologies, everything is still shifting and increasing. So we're vulnerable to stay the same and stay the course. Absolutely. We should absolutely be enhancing our security equally to the enhancement of those threats that are out there. But I think it's important to note that there are a lot of good people with a lot of good processes at every level to have that confidence you were talking about. So seems contradictory, but it's just the journey of the whole thing that is elevated, I think.
Okay, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
Building a home or looking to upgrade what you already have? That's where Indie Grills comes in. From fireplaces, outdoor kitchens, to entire custom patios, we bring everything together to create spaces designed for how you actually live. We work directly with homeowners and partner with custom home builders to get it right from the very start. Are you looking for inspiration? Our massive showroom on the Zionsville-Lebanon border was built to help you see what's possible. So when you're ready to elevate your space, head to indiegrills.com and connect with our team.
All right, we're back with this week's episode of the IBJ Podcast in my interview with Chetrice Romero about preparing for November's midterm elections. Are there serious threats to election security that the president didn't mention? Are there some things that are keeping you up at night that he didn't address?
I think he addressed providing more resources. I would like to hear commitment that we're providing direct resources to the local governments, whether the expectation is states are providing those resources or the expectation is the federal is providing those resources. I would say the concerning thing I have right now is when I was at CISA, we had such a huge effort, a number of people, quite a bit of money. It was the priority for CISA to work and help with every state on their election security, not just cyber, but operational and physical, and provide any and all resources to that. And as of right now, a lot of those resources were stripped off of CISA's website. Election advisors were let go. So I'm concerned. What keeps me up at night is while the president most certainly made very valid, yes, we should be concerned about the increasing vulnerabilities. We should be providing resources. It still contradicts a bit to, well, what resources are we providing? So what I'm looking forward to is after his discussion, what is he going to do? What is the administration going to do next to kind of fill those gaps that have been taken away since the administration took over?
Okay. So you wrote an op-ed for IBJ's sister publication, The Indiana Lawyer.
I do. I love giving my opinion on things.
Well,
ask my husband.
Speaking as the editor of the Indiana Lawyer's columns, I appreciate it.
Yes.
One of your main points is that proper election security begins many months in advance.
It is not just the day of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So given that we have a general election in November.
We do.
Sounds like there's a lot going on right now.
There is. Yeah. Yeah.
So let me set the stage a little bit. Tell me if I understand this correctly. So elections in the U.S. are decentralized, and they are all run locally.
They are. Yeah.
And in Indiana, the county clerk is, for all intents and purposes, the top election official.
Yes.
Of each county.
Yeah. So 92.
Yeah. So what do you suspect, or what do you know, since obviously you're involved, is happening right now on the state or local level to prepare for November's election?
So I would say, I just actually spoke to a county clerk this morning in preparation for their upcoming conference of how we can work together and provide some real case studies of counties being attacked through cyber attack and how that affects the process of the election. So what are the downtime procedures to continue those processes, right? And how can they continue their job in those situations where they don't have a lot of control, right? Cyber attacks happening, they're not tech people. So what can they be doing while their IT people are working, 24/7 to fix the issue, right? And so a lot of what is going on right now, in addition to those things we talked about early that, should provide people's confidence in the elections, is they're, looking over the poll books, they're verifying information, they're cross-referencing information, they're asking for documentation to make sure things are accurate for the actual day of elections. So in addition to all those things that the clerks do, and don't forget, clerks are also in charge of everything that happens in with the judges and the courts, right? So like, hug a clerk, because they have, unless they don't want you to hug them, then be respectful. But thank a clerk for sure, because they have a really hard job where they have very high priority things. So
I think we should just say, approach a clerk cautiously.
Approach a clerk and thank them for their service, because it is a very hard job and it's a lot of pressure. But a lot of what they're doing too is, how are they providing education to poll workers on the number of processes they need to go through to validate the person is who they are. They're also educating their poll workers as they're recruiting them currently right now on how do you keep yourself safe, because people are a little sometimes. And so you got to just be ready for that one person. And then they are also looking at their incident response plans, not just from a cyber attack perspective, but what if something goes, what if you get a threat to the county clerk's office, right? Because that happens sometimes. Or what if, they have to go through their downtime procedures. How are they working with local law enforcement? How are they working with their state officials, federal officials? So that's all happening right now. The preparation of one day takes, it's kind of like, a big conference or a big party. You start the next day. Like, you take a break, you have a glass of wine, and then the next day you're thinking about what are the things we need to start getting ready for the next election.
It's like the Super Bowl. This is the Super Bowl of county clerks. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that is a lot of what's happening right now at the local level. At the state level, it's very similar in the sense that they're looking at, and I'm working with the current Secretary of State, like I have all the Secretary of States before, where we're looking at what does the coordination look like between local government, local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and the state, and federal Homeland Security. I'll be doing some tabletop exercises where we're going to go through with clerks and their emergency managers and their IT directors all in attendance. We're going to say, okay, a cyber attack happens. How are you going to respond, and how are you going to communicate with each other about it? All right, we have an active shooter situation. All right, who's taking lead on that? What does the public need to know about that? How are you getting information to the public, right? Or there's an AI robocall coming up and saying all the polling sites are closed for your county, and it sounds really familiar because it sounds just like your county commissioner, or sounds just like your clerk, right? Which is something that happened in the last election in another state. So how are you going to navigate that misinformation in the public with, your partnerships with, media and your local channels of communication? So those are the things that we're looking at of how to prepare for that one day that is very critical to our democracy.
Wow.
That's a lot of work.
Even the design of the ballot.
Yeah.
Is a thing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the design of the ballot, the way that the information is being shared with the state is also a separate system. It's secured. The state is reviewing their security and, making sure that if there's any concerns, that's being addressed before the big day. I mean, so there's a lot of moving parts that goes into the critical infrastructure of election. It really isn't just let's just prepare the next day. It's not like college exams.
Yeah. And it's interesting how somewhere in my brain, I thought, well, this would all be like technology based, but part of it is very physical. Yeah.
Yes, very much. It's very kinetic. Absolutely.
So here's my dumb question for the week. Why don't we just go back to an all paper ballot system?
See, I think the paper ballots, and there are still people who do that, right? You do mail-in ballots. We want to make sure that our good people who are serving in the military still have their ability to vote, since they're, doing the ultimate sacrifice of their selves. But I think the value of using technology and validation. Like, how do I cross-reference against BMV, Secretary of State, other state agencies in a matter of days If you had all paper ballots and all paper, like that's a little harder to do, right? So I think if anything, the modernization of the election infrastructure is what allows it to be more secure. And it seems like a very contrary thing because it most certainly opens you up to vulnerabilities, but that's no different than us using computers to do business, right? It's a necessary, it creates efficiencies. It's no different than us using AI for efficiency, right? But with that comes great responsibility, as one wise fiction character said. So I think that's why, to the president's address, to what we've been saying at the state and federal for since 2015-16, is that that's why it's critical, is that we have to be working consistently on improving this process year to year, so that we're keeping up with the bad guys.
So there isn't one central election technology system.
No.
Correct. Certainly not on a national basis.
No.
What about from county to county in Indiana? Is there a melange of different
Yeah, it's all
systems?
Yeah, it's all separate. And so that's another diversification of your portfolio for your 401k, for example, right? There's benefit to that. There's benefit to having decentralization of systems. And a lot of times people are like, well, they can hack the poll, they can hack the polls. Those polls aren't even connected to systems. They are like standalone systems, and they're connected to secure Wi-Fi, and they're standalone. So you have these segmented...
The polls meaning like the thing that's counting my vote.
Yes, the thing that's counting your vote. So that's not even connected to that, that bigger picture I was telling you, like local governments. That's where the vulnerability is when you have just so many people trying to attack their systems. It's not even connected to that system. It's standalone systems. So that's why it's hard for me to...
So I could like hack into the Parks and Rec department and then find my way down to the clerk's office, hacking wise, and then get into the polling system.
You can't do that.
You can't do that.
No, you can't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's standalone, which is what I think makes it much more secure than people believe it is, right? And I understand. I mean, before I got into election infrastructure, I thought it was all connected. I was like, oh, okay, like it's all connected. But those are the things that you modernize it, but you keep it separate. And that's also basic cybersecurity. Segmentation is very important to do, right? And making sure you have diversification of things. Now, if there is discussion from a state level of providing overarching education, overarching cybersecurity resources, even systems in place to identify threats, which is being done right now, that still is a monitoring situation, and it's still not touching the poll books. So that's on the local side.
Right. Yeah. And you brought that up in the column, that the state doesn't effectually centralize the system.
No.
It is providing support to all the individual systems.
Exactly. Very
Okay.
different. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but also like establishing some consistent standards.
Yeah, and also consistent monitoring, right? We don't, if one of the big reasons why the state's doing that, whether they're using CrowdStrike, they're using Trellix, they're using a number of systems that are free to counties that the state is paying for, which I think is very good because the counties aren't able to afford those type of technologies, is that we can, as a state, see where the attacks are coming from. Also, when we know that there is an attack that is coming in because maybe we heard it from another state or another county, then we can now go into those systems and say, hey, make sure you block this address or this type of thing that's coming in because we know it's nefarious, right? And so it creates an efficiency. And when it comes to time and cyber attacks, that's everything, right? So that it's a support to the systems to better protect and monitor the systems. It is in no way executable to manipulate or do anything to any of the voter data or anything like that.
Okay. So the diversification of all this infrastructure, that is a feature of the system.
Yes, that is a
Not a
feature of the
bug.
system. Yeah, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Got it.
And if there's ever discussion about centralizing it, or we should all be on one system, those kind of things, I can understand that suggestion for a lot of reasons, mainly cost and like how can we all like get on the same boat, and maybe other states do that as well. But with that just comes like we just have to have really good cybersecurity around it, right? So, but I think a benefit to the current system right now is that it's diverse.
Okay. So again, on the local level, what should local election leaders be thinking about right now, or what is actionable right now?
Outside of what they're currently doing, which is reviewing their incident response plans, is I think the biggest thing I took away, especially from the 2024 elections when I was assisting on being an election lead for Homeland Security to the locals, is collaborating ahead of time with your other agency departments. it was amazing to see how many clerks never talk to their emergency manager. Well, if bad things happen, your emergency manager is a wealth of resources. They are also the lifeline to the state for assistance, right? And so it could be something as natural as we've had tornadoes on election day, right?
Mhm.
If a tornado goes through and takes out power to your polling sites, your emergency manager is very much going to be involved, right? So have those pre-conversations so that you guys are both on the same page. And then same thing with your IT person, same thing with your leadership who would be sending out information to the public. Same thing with your lawyer, get your lawyer involved. Make sure that you have, what do you need to do from a legal perspective? There's a lot of election security laws for a lot of good reasons, right? So how are you making sure you're following all those during an incident, right? And so I think those things and having those relationships preset, don't let the bad events, and that's with any event, right? Don't let the bad event be the first time you're reaching out to people who are there to help you. Do it ahead of time, have the call sheet ready, educate the key people in your office, and have relationships, because you'd be surprised during bad events. I mean, relationships are everything. Communication, no matter what the type of event, is usually the number one failure. So get ahead of it. Have a good crisis comm plan, practice it, test it, tabletop it, and you will find yourself to not only feel more confident in your ability to respond to anything that will happen on election day, but it really does just make it better for your voters and your county.
I don't know why this question just popped into my head. I guess I was just thinking about the last time I voted. So, is it a requirement that every polling place have security?
Like a physical security person?
Like an actual person?
No, but it is. I've not seen anybody not consider points of entry. Actually, Homeland Security, CISA, when in 2024, we had our physical security people do physical security assessments of polling sites throughout the state, saying, hey, this is a consideration. This, because you think of polling sites, they're like in churches or they're in schools where you have multiple points of entry, right? You have so sometimes it's that discussion with the polling site to say, hey, on election day, maybe we don't have all the doors open. Maybe we just have one way of coming in. And the people who are volunteering, their organization, their buildings are always so up for that, right? Part of, the training of the polling, the people working the polls is, if a tornado happens, where do you seek shelter, right? If an active shooter happens, how are you communicating with your clerk something's wrong, right? If you have a voter who's very angry that they're not on the polls, and they insist they are, which happens, right? And we're an open carry state and they have a gun on them, then how do you address that and bring that to your leadership within the county so that you can have those right protections in place? And those are all the scenarios that I test consistently with county officials, with the state. Is that coordination piece, right? But you do need to be ready for all the bad things. Bad weather happens a lot, right?
Yeah.
We had a county that lost lightning struck their building and took out their electricity. So it was one of their polling sites. So you're kind of like, okay, well, so it happened that they were able to move the polling site. So, but how do you communicate that quickly, and how do you communicate it quickly to the voters so that they don't feel like they're being, tricked into anything that they may think is nefarious when it isn't? It's just bad stuff happens sometimes. So,
is there anything that I should be doing as a voter to make sure that my vote is secure?
No, that's a great question.
That can help
the
whole process.
I think registering to vote, making sure your information is matching your ID, right? So if you move, make sure you tell the BMV that you need to update your address for elections, right? There's websites you can go and verify that where you're at, where you're registered for. Make sure that's all done ahead of time, so that way when you go, there's not going to be any issues at the polling sites, because they will not let you vote if it doesn't match, right? And that's, again, another protection to feel confident about, right? I think, from a psychological foreign malign influence thing, it's really important just to be informed, look at resources, don't believe everything you see, and just be responsible for information. If you're sharing information, be responsible about how you could be affecting, and don't be a tool that a bad actor is using, right? And so, because you never know where things are coming from, right? So I think as a citizen, that those are the things we can do to just help be more confident and also not be part of the problem that is, out there.
Okay. So
how far are we out now? Is it 4 months?
About.
Is it just going to get crazier and crazier as we get closer?
Yeah, I feel like it just gets more intense for, are we ready? Are we ready? And if you talk to any good clerk out there, they never feel 100% ready because, you always have like a long list of the things I want to optimize or things I want to do better, right? But like I said, I mean, thank your clerk, thank your election board people, because they have a really hard job and they have a lot to do in addition to their other day job of running and helping judges with the courts in every county, which is a huge amount of work. And so I would definitely just be aware that as things kind of get closer, weather starts becoming an issue, right? A week out, you start looking at the weather. How are you handling lines? How are you doing all that, right? And then a lot of clerks are just getting out there and just communicating people. You can be confident in what we're doing. We're really working hard to do it, and we're working with the right people at the state and federal level to do it well.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Happy to talk nerdy about elections.
That's great. All right. Well, let's keep in touch.
For sure. All right. Thank you.
My thanks again to Chetrice Romero. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are several stories and features in this week's issue of IBJ I want to draw to your attention. First up, since The Yard opened near 116th Street and Ikea Way in 2019, Fisher's District has expanded into a mixed-use development representing more than $900 million in completed and committed investment. Mickey Shuey explains how the big bet is paying off. Also in this week's paper, Daniel Bradley reports that 2 Noblesville residents have created a platform for helping families care for aging loved ones. And this week's issue also includes the Indiana 250, IBJ Media's annual list of the most influential business and community leaders in the state. Now, again, you can find these stories and features in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. But I have to say, it's quite a bit easier to access all the latest business news and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business community and economy if you're a subscriber. We're running a promotion right now that gives you complete access for $1 per week for 3 months, just to get a sense of how valuable and original this content is. Just go to ibj.com and click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ Podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.